Okay, so recently I entered the gamedev.js game jam and I came first for gameplay and audio, third overall, fifth for graphics, and the others aren't important. But I thought it was pretty interesting because the game I submitted wasn't very good. As in, the gameplay loop was very unoriginal, but I think it shows the importance of execution when making a game, because as you're about to see, the polish really carried the submission. So let me just show you some of the gameplay of my submission. I could tell you my thought process as I was making it. So originally I had this idea, I'm pretty sure I saw another person do this in a game jam, where you had 1 minute to go to a bunch of different places and use the information from your first run to use it in future playthroughs. But I didn't have enough time to add another pass. I just ended up making it into a speedrun platformer where you get score if you go fast, which is kind of boring, but it's a game jam. Only had a few days to make it because I had school, so I just did what I could. Because my idea was so simple, I wasn't expecting to do well, because I always thought the gameplay had to be good in order to do well in a game jam. I mean, it makes sense, but obviously that's not true, because at the end of the day, all I made was a platformer, just like every platformer before it. I did add in the ability for the player to put platforms below them so that they could get an extra jump, which I thought was pretty cool, but at the end of the day, even that's quite basic. So why did my game do well? I mean, I've just been slating the gameplay for the past couple of minutes, but it came first with a bunch of other submissions. And I think the reason is purely because of polish. The game was so simple to make that I spent the majority of my time just polishing the shit out of it. The first thing I did was make sure that the player controller was really, really tight. So I put in a bunch of coyote time, which is when you can jump when you're slightly off the platform. I put in some jump buffers so that you can jump when you just haven't quite touched the platform. And then I also added that in for the wall jumps as well. I also made the player's jump feel weightier by increasing the gravity the longer they're in the air, and make it so that when you just tap the jump button, you only jump a little bit compared to when you long press it and you jump a lot. And these are all pretty basic things that most good platformers implement. And if you don't know about them, you should definitely look them up because they're really important. The next thing I did to make the player controller feel good is I added in some really crisp animations for the slime. And actually, using a slime was a very intentional choice, because if you have an actual humanoid player, animating that is a pain in the butt. But all I had to do was squash and stretch for all of the animations, and it worked pretty well. I only had 3 sprites in the entire animation. I made a whole jump animation where the slime would kick off from the ground, but it just didn't look as good as simple squash and stretch, so I just scrapped it. And cutting your workload like this has to be conscious decisions you make, especially in a game jam where the time is so limited. Just using what you can to make your work easier is really important. Another thing that really adds to the polish is the use of sound effects, actually all special effects. So I spent a long time mixing the sound effects that I used in the game. For the jumps, I used a plunger being unstuck to get that pop sound, which I thought worked really nicely. It was inspired by Pullywog, which is made for Ludwig's game jam. I really like the sound of the tongue hitting the wall, which sounds really weird if you don't know what I'm talking about, but you should definitely play this game. But I made sure to make them a lot bassier, because in Pullywog, the sound effects are all very focused on the high tones, and there are very few mid tones and bass tones. So I made sure to fix that in this game. And the music is just a remix of one of Boss Fight's songs. I made sure to make the music exactly 1 minute long, because that means that the player will know when they're running out of time from the music and not have to check the timer all the time, which is something that I thought was quite a good way to have the music affect the gameplay. I also tried making good use of screen shake and slow-mo. So when you place a platform, obviously there's a lot of slow-mo, which just looks nice, and having the sound slow down is just kind of cool, which is nice for players. And the score in the top right is completely irrelevant, because you could just calculate that at the very end. But having a score at the top right and then having all the particles rush up to the top corner just feels really good. So I added that in, even though it's completely arbitrary, just to make completing a screen feel better. I was recently watching Adam Millard's video on Vampire Survivors, driver and how he talks about the importance of the score system and how that is really useful for making the player feel good and all the particle systems and that. And that's what inspired that score system in this game. And talking of particle systems, I literally didn't make a movement animation for the slime. I just used particles coming out the back of it and it works perfectly. Particle systems are so useful, not only for conveying information, but they're just an instant game feel boost. So you should just put them in everything, I think. Like I also had like particles in the wind just to make the game look a little bit better. And honestly, it's just a free boost to how the game looks and feels because it uses up basically no CPU. It's just a free graphics boost to your game. And with all of these things to boost the polish, the game turned out like pretty good. It's the first game that I've made that I'm actually like happy to show people, you know, look, I make games and this is what I can do. And the only reason I think it's better than everything else I've made is because of how I put all this time into the feel of the game. Because the gameplay is about as good as all the other games I've made. So what I've learned from this experience is to always put as much time as I can into the polish of the game and to make sure that it feels good to play and not just put all my energy into the gameplay or the graphics. Because at the end of the day, they don't affect the feel as much as the small polishy things. They're the most important part of the game, I think now. Especially when you're working on a game jam where you have a very limited time. For example, in the upcoming GMTK game jam, I'm planning to spend like almost all of the last day just on the polish because I can probably get most of the gameplay done in the first day. But I think that's the secret to a successful game jam entry. I've heard a lot of people talk about this before, but until I've properly experienced the difference that it can make in a game, I didn't realize to the extent of the impact that these changes can have. So yeah, that's my gamedev.js game jam submission. I hope you enjoyed. I want a bunch of stuff from this game jam, which I don't need. So it's all on the screen now. And if you want it, just comment and I'll give it to you because I don't need to use a lot of this stuff. It's mainly other game engines, which I don't use, or stuff for like Java or JavaScript, and I couldn't C#. So if you want it, you can have it. But anyway, that's about it.
See ya.